And we have a really experienced group of panel for us. We have Derek Luk Pat, Jerome Palma. So Derek is from Trinidad and Tobago. Jerome is from Belize, and Dr. Vishnu Doerga, who is joining us from Guyana. And to moderate this very experienced panel is one of our own CCGI directors, who is joining us from Canada, Brandon King. Brandon, I invite you to take the floor now and to introduce your panelists to begin today's first panel, Day 4, Governance Week 2023.
Thank you so much, Kamala. It's great to be here. Great to be part of such an august panel and a great week that's going on. I congratulate everybody for all the work so far. Been a great series of discussions. And I'm really pleased to continue to participate in Governance Week and all the important work of the CCGI. I'm proud to be a director. You know, I lived in the Caribbean for 10 years. I ran the Bank of Nova Scotia's operations throughout the Caribbean, Central America, and a few other countries. So I know the Caribbean well, and great love and respect for the people and the great things that are going on here. So it's great to continue to contribute and be part of it. And I think the work that CCGI does is critical to helping governance and helping companies move forward, both state-owned and private, and especially the family businesses. As we know, the family business is an important part of the economies around the world, and especially so in the Caribbean, where we've got a series of conglomerates, and you know, as one of them is Massey, of course, and great that they've sponsored us, and it's a super video. But really important to the bedrock of the economy to generate employment, to generate growth is the family business. And we're really going to examine a little bit, you know, is the family business talking about legacy or profitability? And can you have one without the other? So some really interesting questions. And I think we've got a great panel that are going to talk about it. And I know we can count on everybody for great questions and commentary as we go forward. So let me spend just a couple of minutes introducing the panel. First, Dr. Vishnu Doerga, just likes to go by Vishnu, of course, is the chairman of Action Invest Caribbean, an ISO 9001 certified educational institution. He holds a PhD in management, specializing in entrepreneurship, as well as an MBA and engineering qualifications. As past president, chairman, and counselor of several Guyanese business support organizations, including the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the Guyana Manufacturing and Services Association, and the Guyana Office for Investment, and the Guyana National Bureau of Standards. Vishnu has over 20 years of private sector development experience. He also comes from a third-generation family-owned business and leads a majority family-owned business that's now in its own second generation, and serves dozens of family-owned businesses and clients that are shifting to adapt to a more sustainable corporate culture. He's passionate about personal and professional and organizational development, and pursues this passion by the numerous organizations he supports. So super proud to have Vishnu with us, and I turn it over to you, Vishnu, for your comments.
Thank you very much, Brendan. And when I saw the topic, profit or legacy, it did feel like a trick question as well, because without profit, there will not be enough time to create a legacy, and without the focus on the legacy that can be delivered, and to get to that destination as well, we will need to be profitable. It's been a real pleasure joining everyone here since Sunday, listening to all the knowledge that has been shared. I think this discussion has been extremely fruitful. I think it needs to be really broadcast to the rest of the Caribbean. We need to find more ways of getting people more interested, more involved. But then it also makes me think about the entire aspect of entrepreneurship. Why do persons pursue entrepreneurship? In Guyana, one of the key reasons is necessity, especially from the history that we've had in the past, and having to provide a lot of goods and services. Many entrepreneurs would have had to find those opportunities, pursue them. And unfortunately, nearly 80% fail within the first 5 years, and it could be that they did not really identify the limitations of the opportunity that existed. They maybe underestimated the the scope of the competition that would have existed in those particular areas that they've chosen to compete in, and a range of other reasons for failure. However, for the 20% that does pursue, we end up with many of them starting to rope in family members into the business. And a family-owned business, of course, is one where 2 or more family members are directly involved in the execution and also in the ownership of the entity. So starting off those founder level entities, it's where first generation businesses start, and a really good book to read on this particular area is Perpetuating the Family Business by John Elward. And it was interesting that this morning we heard about rags to riches to rags, but this is something that has been prevalent for centuries, if not millennia, where, in the Spanish terminology of looking at it, they say from a tavern owner in the first generation to a millionaire in the second and a beggar in the third. In Portugal, they say from a rich farmer in the first generation to a noble son to a poor grandson in the third. And even in Germany, they say the first generation creates, the second inherits, and the third destroys. And the statistics as well is that only about 20% of family-owned businesses last beyond 60 years in the same family. Now, when we hear all of that, we do want to start thinking of, well, how do we get to a place where a legacy and building that legacy drives businesses beyond the second, third, and fourth generation? And as I thought about this, especially over the past week, I wanted to delve a little bit deeper into what's happening in the Caribbean and in Guyana, because we do have a remarkable history of family-owned businesses. They're the backbone of the economies that we have here in the Caribbean. They contribute massively to job creation, economic stability, and wealth generation. And they have nurtured and supported local communities. We heard that yesterday as well, in the way in which local communities are able to benefit from business opportunities that were not previously, those opportunities were not previously accessible to them. Many iconic brands. We have, companies like Ansel McCall as well in the region that have gained international recognitions. They're all born out of family-owned businesses. And one of the key benefits of a family-owned business is the ability to maintain that long-term perspective, that legacy that the owners want to really perpetuate into the future. But of course, as I mentioned before, it has to be based on some level of profitability. We find that with first-generation business owners, in many cases, the Maslow hierarchy of needs steps in, where it is about that initial taking care of the basic needs, the safety needs, to get to a sense of belonging to a society and even their own company, because entrepreneurs in many cases leave other entities because they did not feel as if they fit in. Or because their ideas were not accepted, and they needed to find a place to make their ideas get to that level. And when they get to that sense of belonging, what generally happens next is that their self-esteem needs and their recognition needs start being met as well. And I think that's where legacy kicks in, self-actualization. Why did I start this business? What was the idea that I wanted to bring to reality? What am I leaving for the second and third generation that is worthwhile? And when I listen to the discussions over the past 4 days, I hear so much self-actualized thoughts. And I think it's something that we as a community need to be very conscious about. Because we have thought through these things. Many of us, I'm sure, have dealt with, the first 4 levels of the hierarchy of needs. We're now at the point where we can see much clearer what needs to be done in our community, in our countries, in the wider Caribbean. But how do we communicate with the masses out there who are still looking at their basic needs, who are still looking at the needs of their safety needs, their belonging needs. So we do need to be very keen on how we will communicate with the wider community that exists out there. If I think for a second about Guyana, I can very quickly see how especially in the 80s and 90s, we had many businesses that were started up that focused heavily on trading because of the limitations that we had in our own economy. So we had a lot of import, and I call it import, but back then it was called a lot of suitcase trading and just making ends meet. And with these trading businesses as well, there's not a lot of competitive advantage that is developed. There was no locking in of brands. There was no significant added value because in our economy, and the more I research in the Caribbean as well, I notice many other economies also have to cope with the high cost of electricity, scarce labor, and sometimes not just scarce labor, scarce skilled labor. That also creates limitations to really creating a strong business that can transcend generations. But what also happens in a country like Guyana is that the taxation that is applied to companies usually comes in three categories. Someone can remain a sole proprietor, and as a sole proprietor, they get taxed just like an employee, where 1/3 of their income is at no taxes, another 8,000 or so US of income gets taxed at 27%, and then the remainder at 40%. So with the average income, it ends up balancing off at 26, 27% overall. Then we have the next bracket, which is operating as a commercial entity. And a commercial entity, the basic definition is one that trades in goods not produced by them, so mainly the imported goods. Those companies are taxed at 40%. So, and the third category, of course, is non-commercial, which is almost everything else, manufacturing, services, and the like, which is taxed at 25%. So even our system of taxation causes many of the folks who were initially in trading and have developed themselves in trading to remain sole proprietors. And as a sole proprietor, of course, you own the company. There's no shareholder structure. There is no way in which you can appoint directors. And because of the benefit of paying less taxes, many first-generation sole proprietors, what happens with them is that the business sometimes dies with them, because especially if they have multiple kids who all have an expectation of getting their share, but because there is no share certificate and there's no corporate structure, that has not been done in the lifetime of the founder. When it is already too late, either illness or death takes place, and especially if there was no will. So maybe another piece of advice, if those companies that are still operating using a sole proprietor structure, please make sure that there's a will in place already and that people are informed of their place in the equation, because it's unfortunate how many businesses also die. They don't even make it to the third generation. They actually disintegrate within the second generation. So that is one of the limitations we found in Guyana of not transitioning from sole proprietorship into a corporate structure, just because of that savings of significant savings of almost 13-14% in taxes on net profit. So what we found is that that is definitely a limitation. In many of the companies that we work with, we actually recommend to them to still set up a structure, although it's feasible and it's in their benefit to pay less taxes by remaining a sole proprietorship, to still start setting up the structures, because although it's not required by law, it should be required by themselves just to create some level of continuity in the business, and then to look for ways in which a company can then transition into maybe non-commercial activities, because those are actually taxed at a lower rate and require more investment, knowledge, and expertise as well to be able to operate at that level. So that is something that we do need to take a look at in Guyana to understand well, and the Caribbean, because 70% of businesses in our region are actually family owned and controlled, and that's a large portion of employment and economic growth. I think another way to also look at this is that in the Caribbean, we still don't yet start businesses for the purposes of selling them. So if we're not starting them for the purposes of selling those businesses, then it's highly likely that these businesses will and have the high possibility of remaining family-owned businesses. So we do need to take a look at how do we do it in a more structured way. In Guyana, we've now seen a massive influx in foreign companies. Looking at the opportunities here, and the bulk of these companies are actually coming from Trinidad, Suriname, the US, and Canada, especially Trinidad and Suriname, since those economies are in a weaker position compared to where they were 5-10 years ago. And whereas Guyana has, an economy that's massively expanding, Guyanese companies will now actually be in a position to have to compete against companies that are coming in with a plan. And in many cases, those companies, they're either set up for a specific purpose to compete in Guyana, or they're family-owned businesses to second, third generation that already have a significant amount of structure, and they are coming in with the plan, the budget, the expertise to be able to compete. So it's very pressing that family-owned businesses in Guyana and in the Caribbean get very clear on their role that they want to perform in their country that they're serving, and the structure that is required as well. Now, if we think about the question of profitability, it's really important for the sustainability of businesses. But we also know that when businesses are family-owned, there is always the focus on leaving a lasting legacy. The book I mentioned, has about 50 lessons of how to ensure that we get to a level of sustainability in those businesses, and also how do we make sure that these companies do not disrupt and negatively affect the environment and the community that they operate in. Because again, stakeholders will not want to support a company regardless of how far it goes into the future that does not have a net positive impact on the environment in which they operate. So it's a question that is very critical. I love the opening session this morning with a lot of really practical tips, and I do trust that when we get to our Q&A segment as well, we'll be able to share some of those. But educating the next generation, ensuring that they are very aware of the purpose of the company, that they get the experience of an education within the company as well. That's very important. Assigning mentors at a very young age. I do come from a business-owned family, and mentorship is something that we willingly or unwillingly received because of either being that close to the business or being sat down on the Sunday afternoon and the discussion heading into what's happening with the business, what worked and what didn't work. And in many cases as well, for the second and third generation to realize that the life that they're living or the luxuries that they possess do come from the business. The business is that source of those luxuries, and for them to understand what it requires to achieve that wealth, and then how to make sure that that wealth extends beyond them. So I wanted to share those couple of initial thoughts, and look forward to the other panelists, and then for us to have a good Q&A. Thank you, Brandon.
That's great, Vishnu. A lot of interesting analysis there, and especially in a really unique environment that is Guyana now and what's happening there. So I'm sure there'll be lots of discussion going on and some really interesting insights about how the country is developing and dealing with the challenges that are underway now, both the benefits, the opportunities, and the challenges, how to maximize those and ensure everybody benefits. So great presentation, great thoughts for us all to think about. I'd like to turn now over to Derek Luk Pat. Derek is a father of one, an entrepreneur, a business consultant, and most recently, and great for our panel, a circular economy specialist who believes strongly in impact, efficiency, and balance. Aside from recently launching 3 startup companies, he's got 2 decades experience at senior levels in several sectors across the region. He's led teams as small as 25 and up to 800 and worked in manufacturing, distribution, hospitality, finance, fast-moving consumer goods, and quick service restaurant sectors for multinational corporations, as well as family-owned businesses. Most recently, he's been immersed in the worlds of standards and quality, and now the circular economy, in which he is presently engaged in a Latin American Caribbean regional project and is actively involved in the current international standards development for the circular economy as a member of the ISO Technical Committee 323, the ISO Technical Committee 323 Chairman's Advisory Group. So deeply involved in what's going on now. He holds an MBA from Heriot-Watt University, a BSc in Chemistry and Management from UWI, and recently attained his certification as a circular economy specialist. So really pleased and very fortunate to welcome Derek Luk Pat to our panel. Derek.
All right, thank you, Brendan, and thanks to the CCGI for having me on this panel. I was quite pleased when they put some attention a full day on family-owned businesses, and I was actually just counting how many years out of my 20 plus years that I've worked. It's more than I thought. It's almost 15 years with family-owned and family-run businesses, and some of them were small. I think the smallest one was working with the first generation, the owner's son, who had a lot of money and a lot of time, and that was an adventure. It didn't last more than a year. But I've also worked with a multinational company that is, at the time, many years ago, they were a US $1.5 billion company across, I think, about 20-something countries, and they've grown since then. But it was still a family company and run by the family, and a lot of the decisions were made by the family. So I have quite a bit of experience, not just as an employee at the executive level, but as a consultant working on helping them to, I think Alice there said it a little earlier, to professionalize the organization, because the fact is that with growth, unless you have a massive family, you're going to need to infuse it and should infuse it with professionals. I've also, so for this particular panel, I see we're trying to bring together governance, family-owned businesses, and the circular economy. So I think you know that I've been dabbling in circular economy, and I've spent a bit of time in family-owned businesses. And for governance, I've sat on a number of boards. I currently serve as the chairman of a NGO for special needs kids. I previously sat on the board of the Bureau of Standards in Trinidad and Tobago and the OSHA Authority, as well as for many of the companies that I worked. I obviously participated at the board level as well. So have a decent bit of experience bringing all three together. I think one of the things that stands out for me over the years working with the family-owned businesses is they had some challenges. But let me start with what I think was their strength, was their emotion. It went way beyond your typical, I would say, formal organization, because it was typically founded and the patriarch or the matriarch was still in business, second generation, and then sometimes third generation. You found that it went way beyond the nuts and bolts of a business. And that's a fantastic thing. However, it also can work, it typically and inevitably worked against them. So the types of trying to as someone who was working with the family, trying to keep them on track against a formal strat plan, good governance, compliance, compliance with everything from local labor laws to the Companies Act, that was not easy. And when you have a gap, particularly between the first generation and the second generation, I can't speak too much about the third, what I saw actually was the second generation, not just inheriting, but actually destroying value. That's where some of the very uncomfortable conversations had to be had in that boardroom. So you found that, in my opinion, the first level generation, to Vishnu's point earlier, in terms of very well intended, building the business, very good at it, and starting to put structure, bringing the second generation in, if it's not done deliberately and with a plan. Because I think some of us have seen how some good cases where they would bring in the family, but bring them in at the lower levels and let them work throughout the organization, get acquainted with the operation, get to understand the culture and become part of it. What happened in the couple of cases I experienced was that they were airdropped in, and typically they came from studying after many years abroad and even working abroad. And it typically did not go well. It had challenges with that clash of cultures in terms of first generation, second generation. And of course, then you have issues in terms of mixed messages to the rest of the staff. So that there's so much to be done. And I actually enjoy working with family businesses because of that emotion, that socio-emotional wealth, I think they call it. It runs much deeper, and there's that commitment and that passion for the business. But what they do need is some discipline, structure, and guidance with the right people. But one of the key elements that is required, and this is at the board level as well, is trust. They need to trust the people that are around them. However, sometimes but it can't be trust alone. It has to be competence. The external persons, whether they be at the board level or whether they be at the consultant level or whether they be at the executive managerial level, they have to come with competence too. And that actually goes to the same with the family members, because then you find that there's they may come in with an entitlement approach, and really and truly they need to prove they typically have to show that, look, I'm not here just because I'm family. But so you have all those dynamics in different family businesses, small as well as even very large ones. In terms of the circular economy now, which is a very interesting one, because as I would have said on Tuesday, the circular economy is not something that is being attached to businesses. It's a pathway, and one that I think much of the world at the country level, organizational level, community level are embracing as a sensible pathway to a more sustainable world. And when you dig deep into the subject of circular economy, most business people would realize, but I already do some of this, because it speaks to resource efficiency, reduction of waste, proper fiscal management, et cetera, et cetera. However, the circular economy goes beyond that now, because it goes beyond your organization. It tells you now, for us to become more sustainable, more circular, we actually have to work with other organizations, public sector, other communities. And that's not what in my experience, that's not typical. You have to actually let your guard down a bit. You have to actually work with competitors in a very meaningful way for the good of the country, and then work with other countries for the good of the region, and then work with other regions for the good of the world. Not an easy thing to do. Conceptually, the principles of circular economy are simple. However, when you get into the implementation, into the nitty-gritty of it, and having been sitting in the standards development process for the last 4 years now, it could get a bit complex, but it's expected to be a transition. So what you may find, you would assume that in a family business, the younger generation, maybe second, more third, would come in with a stronger inclination towards sustainability because they're a little more sensitized to it. However, what I have seen is that some of them come in actually even more wasteful, with less regard for resources and value creation than the older generation. So and I'm actually working, I have a client who is a family business right now, and what we're doing with those two generations is trying to merge the ideas together to take the what you call it, the thrift, the frugalness of the first generation with I guess more openness with the second generation, and seeing how that could be blended towards the longevity. Because to Vishnu's point, profit has to be part of the equation. You can't be circular without, or anything can't last without it being financially feasible. But now you have to take into account, just as importantly, society and the environment. So I think I hope I've just shared enough to make the panel discussion and the Q&A a little interesting.
Oh, that was great, Derek. Very interesting. You know, a couple of key words there I really picked up: trust, stewardship, competence, blending it across the generations. I think that's very interesting. And I think your point around, you know, companies doing it already internally, the challenge being how to work with competitors, government, you know, regions to make this really take place, I think is a really interesting point. And to be frank, has been a challenge for the region, you know, with the CARICOM integration, et cetera, going slower than we would all like. You know, that's a real challenge. But so great idea or great thought from you to bring it to the surface, and look forward to everybody's comments on that. Finally, we'll turn it over to Jerome Palma, who's the Managing Director, RF&G Life Insurance, a member of the GA Row Group. We had the benefit of hearing from your director earlier, so I'm sure you're well acquainted with what he said. Jerome currently serves on the National Health Insurance Committee as a representative for the Organization of Insurance Companies of Belize. He is an associate actuary with the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries in the United Kingdom, and also with the Caribbean Actuarial Association. He holds a Master of Science in Actuarial Science with distinction from Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh, a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics from University College of Belize, and a diploma in actuarial techniques and certificate in finance and investment from the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries. Very impressive, Jerome. With that, I'll turn it over to you.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Brendan. Thank you. Appreciate that. You know, when I saw the topic, I thought very interesting, considering I've been working now for the last almost 13 years in a family-owned business, and a business that over the course of that 13 years, I've seen evolve and evolve positively, I must say. And I know you all heard Alistair this morning. I didn't catch everything that he said, but I did catch the tail end, you know, and it was a very engaging conversation, that I must say. You know, so I thought everything ties in. I just hope I can, from my end, give a different perspective in some and highlight some of what we're doing here, and how it might actually be very relevant, and how you can apply it to your own family-owned business, your own boards, and so forth. When I looked at the topic, I thought family-owned business. You know, if we're thinking, what's the purpose family-owned, we need to be thinking just family. And when we look at family, I thought, okay, well, within the family, there's care, there's trust, you know, there are common values and belief systems. But then there's also a desire for continuation of the family, whether that be by joining with other persons, through children, through building the next generation. And if we look at it just from that scope of family, immediately I'm saying, well, it has got to be a lasting legacy that family-owned business need to look at in the long term. You know, that has got to be right at the top of the purpose of the family-owned business. So I looked a bit deeper and I said, well, let me consider the group I am in. You know, I'm in the Row Group of companies. I have a very diverse group, investments in different areas. And we have one of the interesting thing that I pulled out was just the corporate values. Because if you're going to have a long-term purpose, it needs to be aligned with the corporate values of the company. And there were 3 corporate values that I looked at and I smiled and I said, yes, you have these in as your value structure, as your value system. It builds for that long-lasting legacy. Being a responsible corporate citizen, right at the top of the corporate values within the group of companies. That speaks to being environmentally friendly, in what we do, in how we buy products, in just simple things like in an email, think before you print. It creates that value structure there. Another good value that we have in the group, providing strong support for education. I know Alistair spoke about the Purple Shirt program. We support education, whether through providing to schools, directly through our employees, professional development, and it filters down. It creates that value system there. And one of the other things, just right at the corporate values is having the utmost integrity in our dealings. And when you lay that out, you label it and you present it, it creates a structure where everyone across the organization have a quick appreciation of what the values are of our organization. And as a family-owned business, I think that's important. It's very important because at the end of the day, the family-owned business is driven by the name. I am at RF&G Life Insurance, and I can tell you, I have talked to clients, I've spoken with people, and they don't say I'm buying RF&G Life Insurance. No, they're buying Row Insurance. And it just speaks to the value of the name. And that is something else I wanted to touch on. Very small country, small population, that's the Caribbean for you. We like to joke in Belize and say, well, everybody knows everybody. We're that small. Family-owned business drive the economy, push the economy forward. So legacy has got to be at the forefront of everything that we do when we're looking to say, okay, how are we going to build this company? How are we going to move it ahead? It's got to be from the perspective of sustaining in the long term. We have companies in Belize like a Marie Sharp who produces pepper that's known around the world and supporting the local economy, supporting farmers, supporting the economy in more diverse areas. And you see where the corporate values are actually just brought through because of that. The family value then, is tied in with the business objectives. As I listened earlier today and just starting off the new companies, I do recognize in the short term, sometimes it's just about profitability, trying to survive, trying to sustain. But as you establish those foundations, those parameters, you lay them out, you write them out. And like Alistair mentioned this morning, get the professional help, bring in a person that can support the family-owned business. And it's not about letting go control. It's about bringing in the skills and the expertise that would add value and help the family-owned business to achieve the long-term purpose, the long-term objectives. And as much as I think the long-term objectives and the purpose must be that of legacy, we need to have profits. We need to be able to sustain. So as a family-owned business, then there has to be a need to evolve. There has to be a need to say, okay, how do we shift? We see it here where changing legislation with insurance, changing requirements. There's a need for us to then see, well, how do we develop our people or a team up and down the ranks? In the family-owned business, how do you then develop the next generation to take over? That becomes a difficult task. And I know Alice touched on that quite a bit this morning. But those now are a part of the long-term purpose, the long-term vision. How do we build a system that allows not just for the legacy to sustain, but the profits to come with it and continue that sustainment? There's an established corporate framework, there's an established value system, and it is up and down the ranks that you speak it and you try to live it. And it's a value system that people can buy into. Because at the end of the day, it's about the reputation of the family. When that reputation right there is built upon, it continues into the future and it continues into the next generation. I know that one of the comments has always been, by the time the third generation comes around, that's where the question mark comes in. How do we then sustain and how do we continue to build on that legacy? And I think that's where transition needs to take place. That's where there needs to be more appreciation for bringing the professional help, perhaps changing the structure, redefining the roles. Those are the things that must come in. But I do think, at day's end, the legacy should be the main purpose. It should be driven by how do we build a legacy? How do we maintain our name? How do we build on the name? Because it is family owned, family members don't want a bad name. They want to maintain that reputation. So how do we continue to build upon it? What systems and structures are needed? What needs to be put in place? And in a small country like Belize, what I have found is that it takes small family-owned business to be able to partner with public sector to drive growth, to drive development, to include sponsorship, that we are not just reliant on the state. So that's something that I've actually seen and been keen upon, that it helps to move the economy. It creates employment, it creates job opportunity, it increases competitiveness. When you have these family-owned business who are focused on sustainability and have values that include the development of the environment, the social and the governance, the entire ESG framework, So that's a bit of my 2 cents, that I want to put in. I see a few things popping up on the chat. So I think we could have a good engaging panel.
Great stuff, Jerome. Really appreciate your perspective and your comments. And, I think you're in a very interesting position. There was a lot of talking around professionalizing management as family-owned business transition. And you're obviously a great example of that. Maybe you can share with us, how did you feel comfortable joining a family-owned business, that your voice would be heard, that you would be able to have an impact, and it wasn't just all the family? Maybe you can share how your perspective when you joined the business and how the values that we talk about were brought into you, and you experienced it. So love to hear your thoughts.
That's a very good question, Brendan. And I think one of the most interesting dynamic of it was having direct conversation at my level with shareholders. They come in. I mean, it's a family owned, so you know who the owners are. I know Alistair, I know his dad, his uncles, right? So you know them. And to gain their perspective, to listen to them, to understand how they view the business, and how they also appreciate that they don't know everything. They don't understand everything. And we need to bring in the people that support it. So to listen to them as shareholders, as owners in the company, come in and express where they want to go, what their view, what they're seeing, but also say, let me hear what you think. Let me understand from you, and gaining the perspective. I think that is a big part of what helped, like where I'm at now, to buy into the program, to understand, no, this can work and can be a good functioning part of helping it to work and develop in the long term.
So through those ongoing conversations, you became comfortable that your voice would be heard and you have a meaningful role. Is that right?
That's right. And I think the family-owned business gives you that structure. The shareholders are there. There's a vested interest. They are on the ground. They understand the dynamic, and they will help you to contribute to the cause. So, that right there is so key and fundamental.
Excellent. And maybe the other point is around values. There's been a lot of talk around values, especially in a family-owned business, how important that is, for the business to be sustainable. Maybe you can comment a little bit about how the transmission of values takes place within your company, within your group.
Well, it's a filter down in some ways, where in just basic engagement, you see the participation. For me, very early on, having to bring my child to work 1 or 2 times, and the chairman actually being here and as a shareholder and engaging for a second and being okay with, I needed to bring him for a split for just a short time. It's not a problem. And immediately there's immediately an appreciation of the family, and that value right there is built. So a lot of it just through those type of little action, participating in appreciation for staff, in the little tokens and engagements that are done. It is the little things like that that have a tremendous effect.
So it's not just stating your values on a board and putting it on the wall. Right. I guess it's a day-to-day demonstration of the value of family, the value of employees. Is that what?
Yes.
How we can perpetuate that?
Yeah, and that is exactly it. You can put the values on the wall, but if you don't come and live it, it's just going to be something that may not even be read. Right. But when they come in, and a basic gesture is, all right, guys, let's go out for lunch today and get to know people more a bit on the personal level. You create that buy-in of, we're all here, we're trying to understand, we have an expectation, but we're family.
Right. But I think we got the point. So a lot of really good points there around demonstrating the values, living the values, or else that sign on the wall can be counterproductive because people don't believe it. So it's a great point. Maybe
I thought the example Alistair gave with the purple shirts was just a very good one, and not just saying that we support education, but building an in-house program that develops the team.
Again, demonstrating what you're saying and living what you say. That's interesting. Derek, you had kind of had a few points that maybe some of your experiences maybe weren't as positive. Maybe you can kind of contrast that. Is it something like that we've talked about here that, we talk about demonstrating the values, some of that didn't take place in some of the environments that you've been in?
There was, I'll use a particular example of a relatively large company. This is the one where the headcount was about 800, family owned, and a few family members at the higher levels, and they had core values. And what I typically do when I go work with a client is I'll go in and I'll do a situational analysis. But I don't, apart from reading your financials and your strat plans, etc., go in and actually observe the operations, talk with the team, and spend time with them. And there was a clear disconnect between what was on that wall, what was in all these little handbooks, and the perception the staff had of the owners. I would say deliberately the owners. And I was fortunate to be, well, in this particular case, the executive comprised only family. I was the only one that, for the years that I worked there, I was the only one that sat in that was not family. But it put me in a position to be able to speak some uncomfortable truths to them. I mean, using properly collected information, data, and putting it out on the table. So, because the approach I indicated to them, I mean, it was clear that legacy was important. They had a very strong reputation. Their family name was very strong as well. But like in most cases, most of us just see the outside. We don't see the inside. I got to see the inside, and I said, look, you've worked really hard and smart to create this value, and you want it to continue because you clearly have your children in the business and your grandchildren are about to enter, and you want them there, and they want to be there, because we have situations in families, as we all know, that the kids, they want to be as far away from the business as possible. But in this particular case, they wanted it. And it so I said, look, you guys can't have values that you don't live. You can't. You just can't. Of course, I went in there with no fear if they wanted to get rid of me, but I went in there to say, look, this is what needs to be done. I'm here to tell you the things you probably don't want to hear. What also exacerbated that, and this is something where this is a great forum for it, their board was comprised of family and friends, still family. You don't have to be blood to be family, as you know. And it was frustrating to me at those board meetings because the chair and the other directors did not, to me, hold the executive, which comprised mainly family, accountable.
The fear of holding them accountable.
I would bring this stuff up, but I have to be respectful too.
Sure.
And raise the issues, but it's something that should take, a week. It took months because that that lack of that culture of accountability. And yes, we're friends, we're family, but business is business. And that's a difficult balance for family business. I
especially
acknowledge.
small communities, and now you see them at church, you see them everywhere.
Well, yeah, I mean, this one wasn't that small, but the fact is that when you're accustomed doing something a particular way and you think it works, but I was able to have quite a bit of success there because I started to show them the hidden costs of their business. Because they had high turnover beyond industry average, and we worked out what was creating that, which had a lot to do with the culture and what was perceived as a lack of respect and a lack of integrity. So anytime they had these sessions around core values, there was you could read the room in terms of the staff, cynicism, skepticism, that type of thing. So that needed to change. So once that point was resonated with them through proper data and showing the impact it was having on the business financially, but reputationally as well, because that's one of the things that family-owned businesses feel strongly about is their reputation.
Yeah.
Not just the company name, but their family name is very important for them. You started to see a bit of a change. One of the things that needed to happen is the board had to change.
Yeah.
That
more outside representation.
You need some, I think successful entrepreneurs and business people know, I need somebody who's not a yes man or a yes woman.
Definitely.
I need somebody to tell me as it is. Because I'm the owner or I'm the owner's son or daughter, most people are not going to tell me as it is. That's just a fact.
Yeah.
So having a well-constructed board with the relevant talents that you need, and of course the integrity, the values, etc., is key to that longevity of any business, but of course also a family-owned business.
Yeah.
So that took a while, but it started to. So the next step quickly was that we started to expose the executive to training. Not easy again.
Right.
Because
they know it all.
well, many executives, family or not, are some of the worst to put through training. They feel they know everything.
Yeah.
And why am I here with my subordinates, and why am I being almost brought down as very, very difficult. And yes, it's even, there's a couple factors above when it comes to some family members, not all, we're generalized. But that also helped. But once they have people they can trust to lead them, demonstrate, almost even show and tell, and then start to do pilot projects, because it's a transition. You start to see a bit of a change, because you can't force a change of a behavior, by the way, at any level. They got to want to do it, and they have to do it on their own time. You just have to facilitate. You have to create the environment. You have to, sometimes not even directly, but indirectly, right? Get the message across, get them in the environment. But it really made a huge difference. And we were able to compare 2-year gap using factors, a number of the P&L factors, staff turnover,
those are measured,
staff surveys, external surveys. It showed a strong correlation to the actual deliberate plan that was put into place. So, and my last point is that is something, going back to the earlier point about bringing the generations in. I think that just like parents sometimes well-intendedly, but they spoil their children. I don't know if you use that term in Canada, but I think
absolutely.
You literally spoil them, because they come in and they create, they destroy value, and they also make it very hard for themselves to fit in. So being very deliberate about bringing family into the business, whether it's your cousins, your children, your grandchildren, I think it's important to have a very clear plan and a system to do it and get them well inculcated and integrated into the business.
Absolutely. So a lot of great points there. And we saw from, a positive experience coming in with the row group, and then not so positive, but through real action and trying to point things out, you can see that change can take place if there's willingness there. So great points being made. And maybe just before we turn it over to the panel, or sorry, turn it over to the group, just for Vishnu, a lot of great things happening in Guyana, obviously, but that brings a series of challenges. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, how the recent changes in the economy influence the decision-making in family-owned businesses?
Well, this particular company, I started this one when I was in 2014, because before that I did operate as a consultant. But what generally happens when companies take consultants on board is that, very nice reports get written, and then they find the highest, dustiest shelf to place them on. They call you 6 months after or a year after, and you don't do the same thing all over again. So it was easy money, but not really fulfilling. So 2014, we decided to get more involved from a coaching approach to really turn those values, which, values tend to be abstract on a wall, into behaviors. What are the behaviors we need to look out for in a company? How do we teach people to be more proactive, be honest, and those kind of activities? And when 2015 came around, because this was initially meant to be a hobby company, just 4 of us. When 2015 came around and the discoveries were made, the first thing we did as a company is we went to places that had developments like this before. We visited Houston to kind of figure out what happened there. St. John's in Newfoundland, we took a look at, because they were about 20 years ahead of where Guyana is. And we noticed that family-owned businesses that started to end up in joint ventures there, they also had to make a decision on recalling, in some cases, members of the family who would have migrated for studies or for work elsewhere back into the company. We also visited places like Aberdeen in the UK, and that's about 40 years ahead of Guyana. And most of those places, especially Newfoundland and Aberdeen, had small populations, 200,000 to 400,000, depending on fishing or 1 or 2 industries. And then you can see the transition. So in Guyana, we first realized that the companies we started working with early on were the established companies, the companies that already had a budget for training, already had some idea about planning. But as the competition started to heat up, 2017, when the investment decision was made, 2019, when production started, even through COVID, more and more family-owned businesses started to realize that they could not take on the demand on their own anymore because of a level of burnout. If they were working 7 to 7 before, now they were working 6 to 10. So those type of pressures have caused a lot more companies to come to companies like ours, because we do help them out through the process of first, taking a clear look of where they want to arrive, what's the vision they have for themselves, what is their real uniqueness, and then starting to identify the gaps. What are the missing pieces in the organization? We love to map it out once we know where their vision is and how they want to achieve it. What is the organizational structure that is going to be required? And not just CEO down, what type of board of directors? Who are the current shareholders? How do we appoint directors that can really serve the organization and provide that guidance to the CEO? Because in many cases, the CEO spot on our chart is the loneliest place as well, because the board, they have each other. The managers below the CEO have each other as well. And they all have those massive expectations from both directions on the CEO. We find that in many second and third generation, unless a CEO was being groomed there, it's either the eldest son, and if we are lucky, that eldest son has taken on that responsibility, or eldest daughter in many cases as well, and steps into that role. But very often we also find that no one really took it up, and then someone becomes the reluctant CEO. And that by itself causes issues as well. But with all these developments here, we are seeing more and more companies recognizing the need that if they are going to compete at the scale that is required now in Guyana, that a lot of structure needs to be put in place, and a lot more external expertise has to be brought in.
That's not easy, especially to do that transition, to do it as quickly as they probably need to. But very interesting, and I know everybody's watching and looking forward to seeing the developments, and hopefully it goes very well. But challenges for sure.
Yeah.
A couple of questions we saw in the chat. I believe Ria, you had your hand up.
It was actually what Derek had mentioned in a family business where he was trying to merge the frugality of G1 and the openness of G2, and really trying to balance those generational expectations and trying to balance the I and the we. In the experience of the panel, how have you seen that play out in a family business?
No, that's a really good question. And one thing I'll say, I don't know how many of you have worked with family businesses, I mean, as an outsider, but those meetings are some of the most interesting things. There's not a lot of decorum. There's a ton of emotion. There's usually shouting and people walking. I mean, it depends on the family, of course. But to your point, yes, that was one of the key things. So what was happening in this particular family is that the matriarch and the two other family at that generational level, they ran things for 20 years. The kids who were already adults, they were coming in after being out of the business for many years. And that, again, that's fine. But you didn't prepare properly for that, because they've been out of the country, they've been out of the business, they've only been seeing maybe some things. And when you look at their, because I met with them, when you looked at their professions and their qualifications, they were not business people. I said, okay, so therefore, the idea was to come in and be chief something, all right? I said, okay, fine, but there should be a learning curve. And it's not just about the operations, it's not just about the financials, which in itself is not easy to teach someone who doesn't know those things, but it's also about culture. And I, as an outsider in that particular environment, because it was outside of my home country, I appreciate the fact that when you go into someone's country, listen, learn, double check, and get oriented with, the culture, whether it's the country culture, the work culture, department culture, etc. So defining roles were key, but we always start at the top. And in the case, this is below the board, what is the CEO's role? Because the CEO typically is the founder, the entrepreneur, who goes all over the place, 100 miles a minute. So trying to get him or her pinned to say, look, let's agree. I mean, this is not rigid, it's not cast in concrete, but let's make sure we understand. It's really for each other to understand the different roles and responsibilities, as opposed to you towing the line. And that was key. So it was interesting that eventually, the fit was so difficult. The role of chief inspiration officer was bandied about, which I said, look, that's for later down the line. But make sure that there's a path, but clearly define the roles, because it's not just about you at the table here. The team wants to know, because one of the other issues in family businesses is you have when you are at the staff level, you feel like you have 5-6 different bosses. So for a company that size, which again was an 800 headcount, very dynamic business, a lot of risk involved in the business as well, you needed to have that structure, and those roles are a key part of it. And of course, the roles aren't just there for a title. The roles come with accountability. Yes, responsibility, but accountability. And that's again where I will say the board it's so important for the board to be part of this, because that should be tied into their medium to long-term strategic plan. And the board needs to hold the CEO, but by extension, in the case of a family business, it's good to have the entire executive there and engaging them in the oversight and the accountability for the business. But roles are critical.
No, that's a great point. And I saw that a lot.
Succession planning, sorry. Yes.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I saw that a lot. I was chairman of the board of Scotiabank in Trinidad and Dominican Republic, and as big bankers to a lot of the clients, and we had a lot of family clients. There was a lot of discussions, and thankfully we came with a certain level of credibility so we could help play that role of, helping these kind of questions get answered and saying how important it is that we saw it, that those transitions and those roles and those responsibilities and accountabilities were starting to be embedded into the company beyond the family and beyond the CEO. And it's very difficult. I echo the comments of that you had, Derek, on the experience that you've had and the good experience, thankfully, that Jerome has had around these issues. So it's not easy, but very important that those questions take place. Any other panelists want to comment on this, or should we jump to the next?
I was just going to say, I think
Yep.
Derek touched quite well on that, just at the last point he made, succession planning. Even at the first, the second, third generation, there has to be some amount of succession planning. Mm-hmm. And you do see differences just in how business is done or business was done. You look at one generation, pen and paper, and that's the way business was done, a handshake, and another generation with the device in the hand, the laptop, the tablet. And it's just a different mode, so there has to be that planning where you can sit down in a room and have an effective discussion.
No,
Just
for
wanted to
sure.
add that based on what's happened in Guyana, and this has happened to several other Caribbean countries as well. I think Jamaica is another good example. But in Guyana, with the population of just over 700,000 people, we have more than 1 million Guyanese living outside of Guyana. So migration has really affected Guyana significantly, and also because it's a long process. To Canada or to the US, it can take 5, 10, 15 years. So there are many family-owned businesses now where several members of the family are sponsored to be able to leave the country in the future. And that by itself is creating a very strange dynamic. But coupled with the fact that, 10, 20 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, the most desirable professions in Guyana were being a doctor, a lawyer, or maybe working in a banking environment where at least you have a uniform and air conditioning. So there are many, many even businesses, family-owned businesses, where that was the encouragement. You better grow up to be a doctor or a lawyer, which is so far removed from the actual business that generated the wealth that allowed them to even pay for the tuition fees. So coming back into the company, if at all, it is such a disconnect between what they have specialized in and what the business actually requires at this point in time. So I think one of the mistakes that family-owned businesses also keep making is sometimes the unrealistic expectation that family members will just work in the business without a salary just because they get a roof over their head and food to eat. And that is something that causes many second, third generations to want to actually be, as Derek mentioned, as far away from the business as possible, go get the job somewhere so that at least they know they'll have some cash in the bank at the end of the month. So I think when it comes back to the initial question of the differences between G1 and G2, that early on recognizing what will be required in the family for generations to come and building a framework to suit that family members opt in rather to be forced in, I think that's a good way in which we can make sure that we get much stronger family-owned businesses.
Well, that's a great point. So Saron, you had a question around, do you think it's easy to lose your value system? Do you want to expand on that a bit?
Sure, no problem, Brendan. Because I heard Aliz's story, and he's running a company 400 and something employees strong. Yeah, and Jerome is speaking about, the value system, it has come down, and they're now into third generation and it's been maintained. And then I heard Derek's story about this company, about 800 something employees, and it was a little bit different. So as a G1, for me personally, that is something that I can't see into the future. But I want my company to grow. We all want our companies to grow. But I'm still cognizant of the fact that it might be easy. What I envision, what I lay down as the value system may not be adopted 40 years down the road. So from Derek's point of view and the point that he's made, how is it easy? Is it easy to lose that value system as we go? And what can we do? What can I do as G1 to make sure it maintains and have a raw story?
If I can, Brandon, one of the ways in which we deal with that is not to think about values as if they will just automatically benefit the company, but to also take a look at the source of the values. So when we do value exercises, we always look at, for the owner themselves, the person who actually started the company, what are the critical values to that owner? What do they really want as values to be in there? Usually we end up with 3 to 5, but then we look at the other major stakeholders. When we think about the team has different values that allow them to align with the company that might be slightly different from the owner. We have, as a market as well, let's say we're an accounting company. For an accounting business, the value of accuracy and maybe punctuality are key values that are required as an industry. And then what do the customers also want? What are values that will really resonate with the customers? And if you do that exercise for the different stakeholder groups, you'll see some overlapping areas. And it's always good when there is some level of overlapping, because then you'll have common agreed values. But then you can also add on the ones that are really important, maybe 1 or 2 that really are different, but they're very important to the clients of that particular business. Because our values are not just internal, we also want to put them externally so the market can observe what we do and resonate with it, or in some cases not resonate with it as well. And I would always recommend on an annual basis with the companies that we work with, we take a look at it. Are they still relevant? Are they still the best possible values and behaviors that drive us to where we need to go into the future? Or do we need to make some slight adjustments here and there based on the different stakeholder needs? But that's the way we've been approaching it.
Thank you.
So that's so important.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jerome. I'd like to hear your perspective on this too.
So I was just going to say that's, I mean, the values, those are established on the understanding and the knowledge at a particular point in time. And, in a few years' time, in 10 years' time, technology may change some of what you may adopt as a part of the value structures. There's growing up, treat others as you want to be treated. And then you hear, well, treat others as they may want to be treated. It may seem that such a simple shift, but those are the evolution of value systems.
That's a very good point. We're getting a little on in time. I see a hand up from Camille Facey. Camille, your question?
Hi, Brendan.
Hi.
It's more a comment. First
Great.
of all, thanks to the panel and the opening speaker. Excellent. I just wanted to input to the session that very often when we are employing persons as family business owners, we need to think about those employees as also investors. They are investing themselves in our businesses. They are choosing to spend their time in this business. And people today have choices, and their choices are not limited to just Belize or Jamaica. They can take their talents elsewhere. So some of the principles that you have all enunciated are so important in terms of making that person feel a part of the structure. And I think in Jamaica, Grace Kennedy did it very well. In the 70s, when we were having a lot of migration, the leadership at the time said, no, we can't lose all our people. And they brought them together and said, this is why you need to stay in our business. You are a part of the future. So I just wanted to sort of throw that into the mix, because Grace Kennedy is now 100 years old.
100 years
They're
old,
known internationally. And it was because of the culture that the family created when they decided to professionalize and keep the people they needed to help them grow the business.
Well, that's a great point, Camille, and I really like your thought around people are investing. They're investing their time, their energies, their commitment, their love. You know, we see that, and we see that in the most successful businesses are you know, where the employees and team goes above and beyond, not because they're forced to, but because they want to, because that they care, you know, and if you can generate that kind of support, you know, that's a tremendous advantage, you know, very difficult to compete against that. I see Simone has her hand up as well.
Oh, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for this. This was I'm really enjoying today. So I have a personal stake in this particular topic. What you all have shared has made me think a lot about I want to say the raison d'etre of these family businesses and these SMEs, because I think it was Dr. Vishnu that said it first. You know, sometimes these businesses start because people looking to meet their subsistence needs, you know, just to survive. And no thought is given long term to where this company is going. And it harkens back to what Nadia said earlier about the purpose. Because even for me, you all made me think for my business, I honestly did not even contemplate if my children want to get involved. They don't. Like they're not that old yet, but I already know this may not be the thing for them. So for me, my question is, as a business owner, and this is for Derek too, you could jump in. You consulted persons. For me, I'm wondering, is this a legit? Because you know, sometimes people, when you look at profit versus legacy, I don't want to say I feel like not you all, but sometimes people guilt you to think it should be about legacy, but maybe it should just be about profits in some instances. If you just start a business with a view to making something successful and then you sell it off because you know your generations to come may not even be interested, and you take it for what it's worth and then you move on. Because that too, to me, is legitimate. Because I'm thinking, now that you're talking and your experiences, not everybody's family is invested in it. Not everybody could find somebody to hand it over to. And even if you do, it may not even be a family member, a blood relation. It might be just somebody else. And the company takes on a very corporate, family-less, kind of faceless persona. You know, so I'm wondering, you know, if you all have, I guess, not only opinions you do, but, you know, guidance for persons who start businesses, like, you know, in terms of governance and stuff, how you could set it up. Because a lot of small business people I know and I work with have not contemplated it at all. It's not even, you know, in their vision right now. They just want to survive. So thanks.
Derek, maybe you can comment on that, Derek. That's a great question, Simone. And
Yeah.
we shouldn't force everybody into one bucket, right? So love to hear what you think, Derek, on that point.
Yeah, I can identify with what Simone said, because I started my own family business, and it was very deliberate family business. And what I would advise for those who want to, at some point, once you settle, is this is the value of having advisors or a board or a mentor who has enough experience to tell you these things, and things that, because you would be so busy with the operation and cash flow and growing the business, dealing with customers, dealing with problems, doing all the administrative stuff, you sometimes don't get the chance to lift your head and look ahead. So if you deliberately want to create a legacy out of this, you want to plan for that. But of course, with all plans, you should have alternates, options, because plans change over time and they evolve. So, because I have encountered a number of second generation, some of them are my friends, who detest their family businesses. They do not, and the worst thing to do is, because I mean, I take Camille's point, but not all family actually want to be there. Sometimes they are in some ways strong-armed because the family code or the expectations, and instead of them pushing back, they go in. But again, this is where, and the reason, Brendan, just to qualify why I speak about difficult experiences, because that's my career. I go into difficult experiences. It's deliberate. I don't just find myself there and, you know, I go in to see how we could improve things, create value. And that this also ties in a bit to the question on the values, because it's values. Sometimes, depending on who you're dealing with, they may pull them out of a book, or they may pull it out of a case study. But if you gotta get the person with the right sounding board, and again, I keep going back to boards, they would ask you, what does this mean to you? And these values, to me, are real values. When tested, you hold your ground. That's, to me, what values are. because it's easy to put up these things. But if you are put in a situation, will you stick to those values? And once you could say yes to that, you can bring that into your organization, lead by example. And to the point about over time, values, if done properly, should be incorporated with a company's long-term goals, its strategic plan. So I see values as evolving, because the fact of the matter is that, especially with family-owned businesses, it's connected to the owner, to the founders. But as you pass the baton on through the whole process of succession planning, you then should allow these upcoming owners, the people who are going to take over, to start to evolve, because the company will evolve. Because as a company, typically, if companies are run properly, they grow. And this is where the whole professionalization has to come in. Framework, structure, compliance, risk management, people management, performance management, all that has to come into play as well. So making sure and lining that up properly goes hand in hand. So Simon, you are where you are today. You need to put aside some time. Where am I going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from here? And because, as we all know, time passes very fast. And if not well planned and executed, it will become more difficult to deal with the issue.
Well, that's a great point. And speaking of time passing, Kamala, ours may be up. But a great panel. I really thank everybody for their attention. Great questions, great responses from the panelists. I think gave us a lot to think about. So really appreciate everybody's time this afternoon.